Good morning. I'm like to call this meeting to order. I am Board Member Ed Prince. I call the February meeting of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Board to order. Thank you to Sound Transit for hosting us today. Next up is our theory of change. We begin every meeting by grounding ourselves in our theory of change, which reads, if we create a homeless response system that centers people with lived experience of homelessness, then we will be able to respond to the needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. Next, we have our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor this land and its people, past and present, and we are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous peoples. All right, next up is a roll call. Effion, will you please take a roll call of the board?
Certainly, Board Member Prince. Member Constantine. Member Barone.
Yeah.
Present.
I thought I wrote, I deleted it.
Member Balducci.
Here.
Member
So-
McWhorter Jr.
Here.
Yeah. So I'll
Member
be brief.
Bernie?
I've got the mayor doing a KCRHA call about files. But
Member Prince.
thanks for everybody's help. Yesterday, Thursday,
Member
I
Backus.
was there to city.
Here.
Member Moore.
Present.
This couple times, this morning.
Member Harrell.
Featured comment later.
Here.
And featured comment.
Member Nelson. And Member Green.
Here.
Board Member Prince, we have quorum with 8 members present.
Thank you so much. Next up is our Chair Pro Tem election. Our first item of business is electing the Chair Pro Tem of the Governing Board for today's meeting. We expect to elect permanent co-chairs after the adoption of our bylaws. Until that happens, each meeting will be chaired by a Chair Pro Tem. Are there any nominations for Chair Pro Tem?
Mr. Chair, this is Member Backus.
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to nominate you, Ed Prince, as the Chair Pro Tem for this meeting.
I second that.
All right. Motion's been moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations? Okay. All those in favor of the elected to elect Member Prince as Chair Pro Tem, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is the approval of the consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda. It is the approval of the December 2024 Governing Board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the agenda, consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, this is Member Backus. I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Next up is our CEO update. Our monthly CEO update from Dr. Kelly Kennison.
Good morning, everyone. Very nice to be with you for our first meeting of 2025. I know a lot of information has been coming to you, board members, already this year, and very much appreciate just the enthusiasm and seriousness with which you're taking the business of getting KCRHA on track and bringing more of our unsheltered neighbors inside. I particularly appreciate the partnership of the county and the city as we have worked to understand what the federal changes mean for our homelessness response system, all of our employees as well, and the communities that are impacted by these proposals. As you know, KCRHA's commitment to serving all King County residents using equity and social justice principles to administer the homelessness crisis response system remains unchanged. I know there's still uncertainty about future federal dollars. For now, federal funding is flowing as normal, and we will be keeping our providers informed of any federal actions that affect the agency's funding and programs. And again, look forward to your partnership on serving our whole community. We are very happy to announce that we were able to launch successfully our Salesforce grants management system on January 27th. As many of you know, and we discussed briefly at our last meeting, this has been a while coming, but our finance and program teams have really been all in on prioritizing training and software updates and assistance for both our staff and, of course, all of our service providers. Things seem to be going very well so far for such a rollout of this magnitude. The new system is going to provide us with a lot better data for tracking our contracts with our service providers and budget information, and really providing kind of next level customer service to them. I'm also happy to report that as of last week, we were able to complete 98% of our contract renewals. That's 193 contracts total. And that is compared to 45% that we had done at this time last year. We also have received and paid 99% of our 2024 provider invoices. And that is a great partnership with our providers to get those in quickly. And again, we have paid 99% of all invoices due for 2024. And again, last year was around 45% at this time. So very happy to celebrate with you that continued success. We're also on track, thank you, county and city partners, to have our master service agreements finalized much earlier than in previous years. So that means we can really begin moving forward with the 2025 budget additions and related procurements that we were given in this last year's budget cycle, and very excited to continue to work with your offices on those. For severe weather, I also wanted to flag a sort of a new process that we're using this year, sort of an additional tool to try to respond to service provider inquiries and needs to get funding a little earlier in the year. So we've announced a severe weather request for qualifications process, and that will identify and pre-approve a diverse group of agencies who are able to provide severe weather responses. This will help us front load some of that procurement and compliance work that we need to do, but that slows things down once we've received money from our MSAs, or the approval to obligate money from those MSAs. And then we can do the proposals for those funds in a much shorter order. So we published that RFQ February 10th, and we've provided 3 information sessions. The next one is next Monday, and the submission date for those is March 10th. And then we'll have pre-qualified awardees the last week of March. So that is really, we're really hoping that that helps us get that money out quicker. For our District 5 shelter, we had a notice of funding available released on January 24th, and we're working diligently to get that request for proposals drafted, and look forward to working with your office, Councilmember Moore, on what that release and procurement looks like. Turning to COC activity, I had the pleasure of providing the welcome and attended the COC's biennial convening on January 27th. KCRHA's Daniel Ramos presented on HMIS data tools and limitations for that group, and board member Victor Liu presented on the COC's governance charter review and updates, which is an annual HUD requirement. And next month, you'll hear directly from our co-chairs, Ruby and Dorsal, all about their COC work for 2025. Turning back to some of this board's work, over the last 2 months, we've all been working really hard on our bylaws, which I know are really important to get finalized. KCRHA has just been facilitating that work, but your teams have really been doing the heavy lifting there. We hope to have those published very soon, and then a vote at an upcoming board meeting, hopefully March, if we can get all the details finalized. And as Council President Prince said, once we approve those bylaws, we'll be able to proceed with our board chair elections and some of the other important business to get the board set up for this year. I also want to thank your policy staff and council staff from your organizations for helping plan our April governing board retreat. That will take place at the Together Center in Redmond on April 11th. We're really thrilled to have that organization host us and for the agenda that the planning team is putting together. And we'll share more about how that shapes up with you at our March meeting. With that, I turn it back to you, Member Prince.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kinnison. That now brings us to public comment. If you are here with us in person, please sign in to comment with Affion. If you are providing comment via Zoom, please raise your hand now and you'll be called on in the order received. Each commenter will be able to speak for 2 minutes. Public comment will be open for 15 minutes or until others would like to speak, whichever is sooner. We do ask that public commenters to please keep your comments related to an item on the agenda. Affion, will you open public comment?
Certainly, Member Prince. First up, we have KCRHA Floyd.
Good morning, esteemed members of our governance board. My name is KCRHA Floyd, and I stand before you today to address the matter of utmost importance and urgency, the overdue compensation owed to the Lived Experience Coalition. The LAC has been instrumental in guiding our homelessness response, providing critical insight and expertise that only those with lived experience can offer. Their contributions have been invaluable in shaping policies and strategies that are both effective and compassionate. However, despite the unwavering comments and hard work, there have been significant delays in compensating the LAC for their services. This delay in payment is not just a financial issue, it is a matter of justice and respect. The LAC members have dedicated their time, energy, and expertise to our cause, and it is our responsibility to ensure that they are fairly compensated without delay. Failing to do so undermines the trust and partnership we had built and send a message that their contributions are not valued. I implore the governance board to take immediate action to rectify the situation. Prioritizing the payment of all past monies owed to the LAC is not only the right thing to do, but also essential for maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of our collaborative efforts. By addressing this issue promptly, we demonstrate our commitment to equity, justice, and the value we place on the lived experience that are crucial to our mission. Let us honor our commitment to the LAC and ensure they receive the compensation they rightfully deserve. Thank you for your attention and swift action on this critical matter. I yield my time.
Thank you. Before we call on the next person, I just want to reiterate that we're trying to make sure that public comment is related to items on the agenda. I do not see that issue on our agenda. And so just for fair notice, we're trying to limit it to items that are on the agenda. Affion, will you call the next person?
Member Prince, there's no one else raising their hand, so I will ask 3 times if there are any other speakers, and then we can close public comment.
Okay.
Does anyone else wish to give public comment? Does anyone else wish to give public comment? And finally, does anyone else wish to give public comment? Chair, we can close public comment.
Okay, we will close public comments. And we will move on. Next, we're joined by the KCRHA.
Pardon me, Chair. I don't know if you can see my hand raised. It's a bit dark there.
No, I couldn't.
Okay. May I speak?
Can I finish closing public comment and then I'll call on you?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem. All right, we are closing public comment. We are going to be joined by our CFO and Deputy CFO, but I want to hear what Lamont has to say first, and then we'll proceed.
Thank you, Ed. Regarding public comment, I know it's very important for us to be able to hear from the community and hear from the public, and that transparency is very important. And there may be times where there isn't something on our agenda but the public, the community wants to address or bring something to the attention of this board. And I think that in community engagement and transparency is very important. And it just feels, to be honest, a bit oppressive. And I think especially given these times that we're living in the current political context, and the challenges that we see with our democracy, that there may be something that's not on our agenda that is a pressing and urgent community issue where folks want to bring to the attention of public comment. So I would encourage this board to revisit and rethink public comment to allow the community to share what is on their heart and mind in pressing issues and not be have their voice restricted in such a manner.
Thank you for the feedback on that. All right, James and Tiffany, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you. I am going to share my screen if I can find the share button. Hold on one second. Okay. So this is the KCRHA funding model. I think everyone should be able to see my screen now at this
You
point.
cannot.
You cannot. Okay, let's try this again. Now, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. So today we're going to cover our funding model. We're going to cover how our model leads to negative cash. We're going to cover the need for cash advance or some other mechanism to deal with the negative cash. And then we're going to talk about how our negative cash balance resulted in audit finding for 2023 audit, and then any actions needed. So our funding model, I think the most important thing to understand here is that we do not generate revenue. We start off with zero cash in the bank. We were never funded with a reserve or anything like that. So we start off with zero cash in the bank. We do not generate revenue. We are a cost reimbursement model. So we incur expenses, we pay for those expenses, and then we can submit them for reimbursement. So based on that model, it forces us into a negative cash position all the time. Part of that model is we go through a whole budget process, which everyone should be familiar with. That takes place from December to January, where the GB approves our budget. Once the budgets are approved, we can enter into our master service agreements with our funders, and record time this year, we've gotten pretty far down the road in having our new MSAs with both the city and county in place for the year, which will allow us to start submitting invoices to get reimbursed fairly early on. But as this process is underway, providers are submitting invoices to us. And as Kelly shared at the beginning of the meeting, we actually have 99% of our contracts are completed. We actually have 2 contracts for one provider that have to go through the process to get completed. So realistically, we have all of our providers have all of their contracts in place for 2025 and have been submitting invoices to us through our Salesforce system, and we have been reimbursing them for their January expenditures already. That, though, then will allow us to end up going into the negative. When I say negative, the actual bank balance, we don't have a bank balance. It sits with King County's Treasury Department, KCIP. We're part of a pooled account, which has a very large balance, but the tracking of our money is that we are negative. So the county allows us to go negative. And through that process, we're able to then continue to reimburse our providers so that there's no delay in them receiving their funding. We then, once we reimburse our providers, we then can submit our invoices to the funders. And then it takes, anywhere from 30 to 60 to sometimes even 90 days to get reimbursed from those providers. If we were to actually carry out a year and fully end, we would be zero, net zero. But that's not the case. We move into the next year, the next budget, and so we have carryover from the prior year that we're still paying for. And then the new budget starts going into effect. So this here is what our 2024 cash balance looked like. We had pretty much carried a negative cash balance most of the year, and we ended the year with a negative cash balance. We did receive a cash advance from the county and from the city 2 different times of the year, which is where you see us in August. We finally go into the positive for a short period of time, then quickly go into the negative. King County, because of the fact that we are negative so many consecutive months, King County has a policy in which anybody that's in that pooled account, whether it's a department or an agency like we are, it requires anybody that goes into the negative for more than 90 days to go into a formal interfund loan. And so they are requesting that we submit an application for it, but that's the reason for the counties ask for us to complete an interfund loan, is because we've been negative for more than 90 days. For 2025, this model here is projecting cash advances along with the interfund loan. It will project that we will stay in the positive for most of the year. The only way this works is to have regular cash advances. We're working currently, though, with our various funders to come up with a solution that works for everyone. And so there's more to come here, but as we work through these with our various partners. The 2023 audit finding is, we had our exit conference last week. The finding is going to be published this week. It's the authority's funding model results in a negative cash balance at year end, placing our current service levels and future obligations at risk. The reason this is happening is, as I described, our model above, but it's a significant timing gap between when we, the authority, pays our service providers and when we receive cash for reimbursement of those service providers. And that results in us carrying a negative cash balance. This is related to 2023. So I'm showing here the 2023 cash balance. In 2023, we were receiving regular monthly cash advances from our providers up through November or through October. And then there was some issue with the system, I think, and we didn't get the last 2 cash advances until January, which then, as you can see in December, we were negative cash for December 2023. And that resulted in the finding of us having negative cash balance at year end and resulted in the SAO finding. The state auditor's office is recommending that we implement a funding model that would produce positive cash flow and sustain current future obligations. Another recommendation is that we request developing a funding plan that results in sufficient and positive cash balances. And then the third is working with our granting agencies to develop an efficient and effective review and approval process to ensure authority receives prompt reimbursement of grant funds. And we are doing all of those with our funders, working very closely with them to assure that we improve our invoicing to our providers, and Salesforce is going to be a great help with that. And as Kelly mentioned, we just launched Salesforce 3 weeks ago, and it is going really well, and we are reimbursing providers. The other component of that, though, is it allows us to automatically turn those reimbursements into an invoice so that we can invoice our providers faster. So we hope to see an improvement in the way that we're able to submit our invoices, and hopefully then it will help improve the partners that we have, the funders, to being able to reimburse us for those. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for, Councilmember Roon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James, for the presentation. So I mean, I want to acknowledge that the audit finding is more of the structure that we as kind of entities have imposed on KCRHA, and so I appreciate the work that's being done to address that. I had more of a question, just kind of related, touching on what Dr. Kinnison was reporting on the federal funding issue, and just trying to think of how that connects to the sort of like very tenuous, I guess I would describe, funding model that we have currently, and just a little bit of trying to understand if we're set up to address any kind of like potential like cliffs of the federal funding, what that means for our providers, just because we don't have those reserves to potentially kind of continue that funding, or any thinking that we're doing as we think about this funding model. I just want to make sure that, you know, obviously if there's funding cuts, that's going to impact our services, but I'm a little worried about our providers and the staff and those agencies. So I'd just love to hear perhaps from Dr. Kinnison or James about how we're potentially contingency planning, given the fact that we're relying so much on these our funding situation is so tenuous, at least as far as KCRHA is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let Dr. Kinnison jump in if she wants. But first, I'll say, you know, when that first executive order happened a few weeks ago, one of the things that the government did do and HUD did do is they locked us out of the ELOC system, which is where we draw down our funds for our providers. That was a 24-hour period because everything got rescinded and then it opened back up. Luckily, we have been very diligent about submitting our invoices to them, and we were not left with a big bag of outstanding invoices with them. But that did then say to us, okay, we need to accelerate and do more about and being more diligent. So we asked our providers that are doing the services to submit their January invoices early, just because it just happened and it was in the middle of January. I was like, you know what, submit your invoices through today, and then we'll submit a supplemental for the remaining balance of January. So this way we can do drawdowns more often. So just at a quick high level, that's sort of where we started and the actions we put into place immediately to do that. And then Tiffany Brooks, myself, and a lot of others throughout the organization have been putting a lot of time and effort into doing a full impact analysis and showing like how much do we have coming through our partners at the county that's federal funds? How much do we have coming through the city that's federal funds? How much do we have coming directly that's federal funds? What does that mean in terms of the services we're providing? Which providers would be impacted by that? If it were to be cut off, what would happen and what would we need to do? I do know that impact analysis does need a little bit more work because we've got the programming team doing their parts. We've got community impact putting their components to it. We have memos being drawn up to be added to it. And you know, executive leadership needs to continue reviewing it and before we can share that out. And plus, we've been working closely with our partners with their impacts and what they believe the impacts would be to us and how that would come through. So we are planning for it and we are trying to figure that out. I don't know, Kelly, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
No, I think you summarized it well, James.
Great. Mayor Harrell.
Yes, thank you very much. James, excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I just want to clarify Board Member Brown's position. So on the federal funds, whether it's going through the COC or through our respective agencies, do they pay similar to the county or the city? That is like on a monthly basis or a 2 month? Do we have like 6 months already from the federal government? How far in the future are you receiving money? I guess that's my first question, if you could think about that. And the second question is, if I'm understanding the results of the audit, that through the use of the county's I think you're calling it the KCIP or the pooled account or the interfund loan. I don't know the county's financial structure very well, but it sounds like they've been very responsive now, and that based on the findings of the audit, basically the issues that have been raised are fixed. I mean, I just want to make sure that's my understanding of where we are now. So I had sort of two questions. How far in advance does the federal government pay? And it sounds like your presentation basically was good news that the interfund loan mechanism is working.
So I'll get to your second question in a minute. Back to the first question, the federal funding. So they do not pay us in advance. It is still the same expense reimbursement that we go through. They, however, have a system in which we actually draw down the funds. So that's our way of submitting an invoice. And when we do that, it's within days that we receive the money. So if we're diligent about submitting invoices for items we pay, we're within the 30-day window of receiving those expenditures. We're paid pretty quickly in that sense. So we're not having 30, 60, or 90 days outstanding invoices. The other part of the challenges with the federal is that so similar to MSAs, but they don't call them MSAs, they call them contracts. They sometimes are slow in signing those contracts, so we may end up incurring expenditures because providers are doing the work while they sign it, so we can't actually draw down on those until those are done. So we are working closely with them to try to, speed up that process on that component. So there is that risk too, and I believe that should be part of our impact analysis. So I think that answers question number one. And then question number two is the presentation I just gave you. There's a few components. So KCIP is King County's Treasury's basically pooled bank account that I referred to. King County Treasury, KCIP. We share that bank account. They allow us to go negative. They do charge us interest, but when we're positive, they do give us interest on that. And that's in an informal way. King County has part of their policy that if we go into the negative for more than 90 days, then they require their departments and/or agencies that are part of that pooled account to go into this formal interfund loan. We have not submitted the application. The interfund loan is not in place yet. That is something that, will need to be discussed. But we're trying to work through other avenues to avoid having a high interest, because really, if you really read through the audit finding, the true risk that we have is the additional interest that we would be charged, because that interest is not budgeted for, and theoretically it would have to come out of a provider's award if we didn't have it, or we'd have to get additional funding to cover that additional administrative cost from our funders.
I'm sorry, James.
Yeah.
I apologize. I don't want you to have to repeat your report. I heard all of that. Just
Yeah.
bottom line the bottom line is that we still have a lot of work to do, such that you're not paying this interest, and is the staff working with both the county and perhaps the city to fix this problem? I'm just trying to see where's the solution that you're saying that you're developing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We have been in constant talks. I believe even Simon has worked with both the city and the county all day yesterday. We had meetings 2 days ago with all parties on a joint meeting. We are working towards finding a solution that will hopefully alleviate the need for the interfund loan and reduce any kind of interest or impact that this finding is representing. We're not there yet, but we're getting close.
Thank you, James.
Lamont.
Thank you, Ed. So my question is also related to the impact analysis, and I'm glad to hear about the work that you all are doing there. And this is also related to a question that I asked during our December 19th governance board meeting when you all discussed the 2025 annual budget. And it was related to slide 8 that talked about the funding by funder where it listed City of Seattle, King County, North King County, ILA, HUD Continuum of Care, and Department of Commerce. And my first question was related to the federal HUD Continuum of Care funding. It noted on the slide that that was approximately 23 million. And so it seems like there's approximately, I don't know, 60 million that is missing from that. And so we wanted to know, where is that money? Is that under King County? And so the question was if we could have a breakout of the City of Seattle funding and what are those funding sources. Regarding King County, is that Human Services Levy funding, or is that really HUD COC funding? And so because this 23 million under the HUD Continuum of Care is grossly underrepresented here. And so I don't know if you remember that question from our last governance board meeting, and if you have that follow-up for us today.
Yes, I do remember the question. And what you have to understand is that this is what we receive, and that's what that 23 million represents, is what we receive through continuum of care. The information that you're seeing goes beyond our walls as an agency, right? So it's including what the county has, what the city has, and what we have for continuum of care. We have not been able to get the full breakdown, but I do have that on my list to work with both the city and the county to come up with what that number is, to try to give you basically a crosswalk to show where the numbers that you're seeing, if they align and match up.
I appreciate that, James, because when I look at the, HUD displays all that information transparently so the public can see exactly how much our HUD COC dollars are. But that's important for many reasons, because the HUD, our local COC governance board is responsible for oversight over those funds. And so if there's a portion of those funds that are elsewhere, how are we ensuring proper governance of those funds? And also, is there a duplication that's happening? For example, the design of King County Regional Homeless Authority was to have a unified regional response. And so, when we look at, for example, in King County and the 52 million that's offered by King County, is there another homelessness team operating where we're having duplication and administrative staff? I've been a part of this work for a long time, and I know that all of those funds were supposed to be consolidated. And so I'm worried that a part of those funds are still being managed by King County, that it really should be all together with King County Regional Homeless Authority. So additional insight, I think, and information would be really helpful. So I look forward to your report on that.
Great. Tiffany, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question, Mr. Green. We definitely do work with those agencies as well as King County, our COC Continuum of Care team and the manager, as well as with the board, to ensure that they are monitoring the spending as well as providing resources as needed to those agencies when it comes to COC compliance and guidance. In addition to that, the COC Advisory Board, they also participate in the review of those applications as they're renewed through the NOFO process, and their budgets are thoroughly reviewed internally as well prior to them being submitted to ensure that they're being monitored and they're in compliance. And our programs team is also working to put together the impact analysis on direct impacts of federal funds for those programs to see how can they help them and support them with ensuring that they're able to spend down those funds and are also in compliance. And any additional resources that we could provide in terms with the federal freeze of identifying if there's any underspend that continue that program prior to us receiving their renewal agreement from HUD, to see if there's a way to possibly extend those funds for an additional time period so that they can continue to spend them down. But we would work on putting together the analysis of all of the funding that's included for those programs and get that to you.
No, that's awesome. And I just want to reiterate that my main concern is when we look at this sheet by funding by funder, it says that our COC dollars is 23 million, and we know that that's significantly higher, right? And so how could those monies come directly to King County Regional Homeless Authority? And because that was the original intent and design, right? Because we save more money, we can get more money to go to housing and dollars, and really have this unified response. And so I just really hope that that happens, and we can eliminate a lot of the middle people, so to speak. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we are working with our HUD representatives. We meet with them twice a month to ensure that we have the capacity to transition those contracts over to us. However, it does take some time to bring those contracts over due to the nature of them being PSH contracts, and they're fairly large contracts. And so we do have to work closely with our providers and our funders and our partners to ensure that they have a smooth transition to the KCRHA so that they're set up for success once they're over here.
Thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's meeting. Is there a motion and a second to adjourn?
Oh, I think
hold on.
Roosevelt has his hand.
I just
Yeah,
saw
no,
that.
hello, Chair, if I could, I'd like to make a motion, and I've been following today. It's based upon comments of my colleague, Dr. Green, about public comment. And I would just like to move that the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Governing Board remove the requirement that public comment be limited to just items on the agenda. I mean, we have to ensure that all the voices, especially those with lived experience, can bring forward any concerns and urgent needs that they have, that they deal with in the community without restriction. And I think that's an essential part of us as a community. I would simply think that we would want to have transparency, and we would love to have meaningful community engagement. And we would have to work with shared goals to end homelessness. But I'm moving that because you guys we are going through the shift in the bylaws. This should be something that we should seriously consider.
I second it.
All right, and by the way, I spoke too soon. We do have another couple of presentations. I just moved too fast. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I appreciate the thought about this. I was going to suggest, just because I think it might be hard to have this discussion as an added item to the agenda, but I think it is an important question of the public comment. We are considering our bylaws, and so I was just going to throw out there about whether that could be something that's part of our bylaws conversation, that we have time to consider it. I think it's an important consideration about how we manage public comment. So I was just going to suggest that maybe we have that conversation as part of our bylaws conversation, as opposed to trying to decide it right now here on the spot.
I agree. I agree with that. Bruce.
Thank you. So I'm not sure how I would vote on the motion if we were to take a vote, but I do want to really empathize for the points made by members Green and McWhorter, that the topic of housing is really what we're all about. Housing people that are unsheltered. And for me, that's pretty much a wide open topic. And that's what we talk about every time we meet. And I'm not into restricting anyone's right to talk about what we're doing. There are certain rules, of course, talking about political campaigns or attacking people and all that kind of stuff, I don't think is what we are to do. But this particular issue, to be very specific on the payment issue, which is, I think, what the testimony was about. What I've just asked, and then I've had conversations with, heck, I'm going to call them Lamont and Roosevelt, and I've been sort of looking at Lamont's avatar all morning, by the way. I think we need to give him some kudos for creativity there. That I've asked staff to really take a good look at what they're, arguing about or proposing. I don't fully understand the issue. If we owe money, we have to pay money. It's as simple as that. And so to respond meaningfully to their request, and it is my understanding that they have, and if they have been given a response, then I think there should be another mechanism by which we resolve perhaps a good faith dispute. So while I appreciate the advocacy that I think Jaja and others have done on this call, I was just hoping that the people with lived experience and staff at RHA, who I think are better positioned to resolve that, just sit down and resolve this issue. And if you can't resolve it, think about the process by which you can resolve it. I don't want anyone that's done good work to be unpaid. It's as simple as that. And so I don't know about the pending motion, because I think generally speaking, we're pretty liberal there. You know, you do a marvelous job of making sure we're liberal there. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Lamont?
Well, thank you, Bruce, for your 2 cents. And but I can't take credit for the creativity in creating the avatar. That's more on the Zoom function. But this isn't really about like specifically the issue of LEC and monies owed LEC. This is about community transparency and allowing the public to be able to bring up issues that are not on our agenda. And this issue has came up in other community and public spaces as well. And so we're not bringing this up because of I mentioned in the public comment, this is a much larger issue about not restricting public from bringing up concerns that may not be on our agenda or on our radar. And that is highly important. And so I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Claudia?
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but I just wanted to share that on another regional organization where I chair a committee, we made this change from having a rule that was about you may only come and speak to an item on the agenda to saying you may speak to an item on the agenda or any items within this board's purview. So meaning like you can't come talk to us about any old thing, but if it's about the thing that we are here for, which is, you know, KCRHA and all its services and what it does, then that would be in order under that kind of a rule. And the fear is always we have very few meetings as a board, and we want to get through our business. And you know, we can't afford to have the whole meeting be dedicated to this kind of very important discussion, even though it is very important because we got to do our business. But I got to tell you, I've never found it to be a really big problem at this. We have been able to be more flexible, allow people to bring us issues that are within our purview, and still get through our agendas. And when there are a lot of people to talk to us, it can be managed by managing the time. People get less time to speak. We put less, so I'm with my colleague, Councilmember Barone. I would like to make sure that we have a proposed policy that everybody has a chance to weigh in and that we vote on it in some kind of thoughtful way. But I just wanted to share that experience. It can work. It really can, and not be, and it can open up us to hearing from the public in ways that are important and also not be too disruptive to our work. We can still get our work done. I think it can be done. Thank you.
Bruce?
Well, just to sort of work with the Roosevelt, who I've known since high school, I want to make sure I'm supporting my brother Bulldog here. If Roosevelt, if there's an agreement to sort of take this offline, work with the bylaws committee, come up with a good policy we could look at, would that be acceptable to you? I guess I'd be asking you to withdraw your motion, or we could vote. That's fine too. But I'm hearing a need to really try to meet your needs and come up with a policy we could look at and could give some input on, and then move on with today's agenda. What's your thoughts there?
Yes, well, for one hand, I would love to get a consensus from here, or at least understand how folks are really feeling just off the cuff about this motion that I did make. But on the other hand, what you're suggesting, and thank you, Member Valducci also, that opens up, Member Barone also, the opportunity to put it in writing in the bylaws and have that frank and good discussion. But I still would like to have a vote on this just for the vote's sake, since we did have a motion and we've discussed it. It'll allow us to at least know where we're at. Doesn't have to be binding, but I would just love to see where we're at.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no.
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 I'm sorry, are we able to do a roll call vote?
I was just about to ask for that.
So we can.
I got it.
Make it clear for public record.
I got it in a month.
Yeah.
So can the motion be restated
Hold on.
before we do
I,
that,
okay,
please?
but we've got Councilmember Barone, and I thought Sarah had a question, but her hand went down.
Well, I think I was just going to ask what the mayor was going to ask, which is, can we get, Roosevelt, can we get some clarity on exactly what your motion is? Because my vote may depend on exactly what the scope of the motion is. So if you could restate it, I'd appreciate it.
I think we hit the nail on the head when by simply saying that the motion is to allow for public comment to be had without having it to be on the agenda. And I think other conversation leading from that was just the fact that if it is pertaining to the subject matter, which is unsheltered homelessness. I mean, I could read it. Let me go back from what my motion is. I move that the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Governance Board remove the requirement that public comments be just limited to items on the meeting agenda. And then, and now the other part is that it just ensures that all voices, especially those with lived experience, can bring forward the urgent and relevant concerns without restrictions. And I think that's an essential to fostering transparency.
Nancy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. First, if the motion stays as it is, I will vote no and ask that it be reviewed as part of the bylaws changes. But if I may make an amendment that goes along with Board Member Balducci's comment that we could also entertain public comment for items that are within the purview of this board.
I will go along with that amendment. Lamont, I see your hand. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Sorry, Chair.
No, if you're modifying to accept that friendly amendment, that it's within the purview of this governance board's business.
Lamont, I think you froze on us.
You froze, Lamont.
Okay, we have an amended motion on the floor, and Lamont is frozen, so I'm not sure what he was how he was going to finish his comment. Any other discussion on the amended motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to the part that I skipped. All right, we have got
Mr. Chair, don't we have to vote on the original
oh yes, I'm
motion?
sorry. You're right, we do. I'm sorry. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now we've got the KCRHA Community Impact Senior Director, Owen, to present our Q3 program performance report.
Good morning, board. Thank you for having me today. Can someone confirm with me that you are seeing a presentation?
Yes, we see it.
Thank you. Okay, today I'm here to talk to you about the performance of some specific KCRHA funded services. This is the start of something that will be presented quarterly in order to give better transparency and insight into how our investments are performing. Today, we're first going to start with looking at data that went through Q3 of 2024, and we're going to compare that data from 2024 to 2023 to see if there's been any changes.
I'm sorry, Owen, are you doing a share screen we're supposed to see? I apologize for interrupting. I just see you.
Interesting.
Nice sight to see, but
Now
I'm getting something. I couldn't see anything other than Owen.
Just a moment, and let me get back.
Now it's coming. I just see a statement that says Owen Kai Fots has started screen sharing.
Yeah, hold on just one moment and I'll get the
okay. Bingo.
Okay. Now are folks able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So like I said, we're looking at the first 9 months of 2023 and 2024 today. We're specifically going to be looking at just contracts that go through the RHA. This isn't comprehensive to the whole system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we're moving through. But want to highlight a couple key takeaways right at the top. We're seeing positive improvements from KCRHA funded contracts year over year. We're seeing more people served, and we're seeing more people who are going through these programs exiting to permanent housing or maintaining permanent housing. We believe that some of this is because of continued investment in non-congregate shelters and also due to some policy improvements in our transitional housing and rapid rehousing programs. First, a little bit of grounding. As a reminder for folks, I know you are all very familiar with the regional action framework in these 4 points, but the only way for us to successfully address homelessness in King County is through a coordinated effort that has a basis of a strong foundation for coordination and collaboration across multiple systems. This includes affordable and supportive housing, something primarily owned by cities and counties and planning departments. The crisis response system, which is largely the purview of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, and then other mainstream systems and services, including things like behavioral health, child welfare, healthcare, etc. Today, we're primarily, I am focusing really on this middle part here, the crisis response and the role of King County in crisis response. One of the reasons we're talking about this is we're wanting to talk better about like, how are we effectively addressing the problem of homelessness in King County? There's 3 different levels that we can look at this: system effectiveness, program performance, and individual success. Today, we're really focusing in on that program performance part, but I want to talk briefly about each of these. System effectiveness is really looking at how is everything across our system working together in order to appropriately address homelessness. We look at measures here that are really much larger than what we see at a program level. We're looking at how many people are experiencing homelessness overall, using things like the point in time count, using some more advanced ways of looking at our HMIS to understand, are we effectively addressing this problem and decreasing homelessness, especially unsheltered homelessness. Program performance measures how well specific programs are doing in order to meet their performance goals that are meant to support the effectiveness of the system. So this is taking the system apart and looking at things like emergency shelter as one component, rapid rehousing, etc. All of this is predicated on individual success. So looking at whether our system, our programs, other parts of our system and services are meeting individuals' needs in order to address their episodes of homelessness and effectively move them into permanent housing. All 3 of these layers are super important. The system effectiveness one, I have talked with many of you, and folks are really eager to step into that conversation. My understanding is that's going to be a part of the retreat that is happening in April to really dive more into that system effectiveness component. Today, we're really focusing in on program performance. And specifically, we're focusing in on 5 key areas that KCRHA funds. We have 3 within emergency response, which is emergency shelters, day and hygiene centers, transitional housing, and then a couple that are in the more housing category, so rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. One thing I want to call out here, just because we use the language of crisis response, but you see that there are housing programs on here, is just kind of to define how these housing programs are clearly part of the crisis response system and not only something that should live within that housing category. Rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing are meant to be housing programs for people in crisis. So these are response mechanisms to get people into housing who have a variety of needs. Some of those needs can be lighter and addressed with things like rapid rehousing. And we know for permanent supportive housing that folks have more complex needs and are experiencing chronic homelessness. So while we do use the broad categorization of crisis response, I just want to be clear that these parts of housing do live within the crisis response system themselves. Okay, first we're going to get into the meat of things now. And I want to take a second quickly to orient you to the slides because you're going to see a couple with this similar format here. Each of these slides is going to dig into, again, a specific program area, and it's looking at all of the programs within that area that KCRHA funds put together. So here we have emergency shelter. And a brief description underneath it, emergency shelters are places where the primary purpose is to provide a temporary shelter for people experiencing homelessness. This includes all shelter types in this slide. And then down below, you have some information about performance year over year. I'll walk you through what that looks like for 2024 for emergency shelters. Again, as a quick reminder, these years 2023 and 2024, these are for the first 9 months of each of those years being compared. In 2024, the KCRHA funded programs for 2,989 shelter units across King County. Spending during the first 3 quarters of that year at $64.4 million, serving 7,791 unique households. 5,181 of those households exited the shelter program. 1,358 of those households exited to permanent housing, which leads us to an exit rate to permanent housing of 26%. This exit rate is something that we look at very regularly to understand program performance. You can see here that we had a 3% increase year over year, from 23% in 2023 to 26% in 2024, which does seem to align with some trends we're seeing in exit rates for shelter over time, where we are seeing increases as we're going forward year over year. This is something that we do need to dig into a little more deeply as we look at system planning through 2025, because we know that our shelter system is quite expansive with many different shelter types and many different services provided within those, so that when we're effectively planning through 2025, we're making sure to be a little more precise in what we believe is causing this effectiveness so that we can continue those investments. All right, that's emergency shelter. Day and hygiene centers. So day and hygiene centers are safe places for people experiencing homelessness to be, and often include access to hygiene services such as showers and laundry. You'll notice that this table is smaller than the other ones because the purpose of these are really to meet some immediate needs of people and are not designed necessarily to move people to permanent housing. Though it's important, as you'll see in that second bullet point, that some day and hygiene centers do offer case management and other services. In 2024, we spent in the first 3 quarters, $3.4 million, and then those programs served 4,663 unique households during that time. Transitional housing. This is temporary housing with a range of voluntary support services designed to be a bridge between emergency shelter and permanent housing. In 2024, KCRHA funded programs with 460 units at $3.4 million for the first 3 quarters. That served 920 people. 450 of those exited programs and 366 of those exited to permanent housing, for an exit rate to permanent housing of 81%. This is a big increase from what we saw the previous year. We went from 66% exit rates to permanent housing to 81%. So while you may notice in this that there were some fewer folks served overall within these, many more exited to permanent housing. We're seeing over 100 more people moving through our transitional housing programs to permanent housing, and more people who do exit programs are going to permanent housing. KCRHA updated eligibility for some of our rapid rehousing programs that allow people in transitional housing to enroll in those rapid rehousing programs where there were barriers to do so before. This effectively creates a new pathway to housing for people who are in transitional housing. And we clearly see that that's making a dramatic impact in people's ability to exit transitional housing to permanent housing. Now, rapid rehousing. So rapid offers rapid paths to housing by providing short-term rental assistance and supportive services tailored to the household's needs. In 2024, through Q3, KCRHA spent $13.1 million towards rapid rehousing, serving 1,350 folks. A total of 603 of those households exited to permanent housing, exited the program, and 473 exited to permanent housing, getting us to a 78% exit rate overall. This shows an impressive increase of 7% year over year for exit rate to permanent housing. You will notice that the funding did go down a little bit and fewer folks were served. I want to talk about that briefly. Some of our funding was COVID recovery money going into rapid rehousing, and that money was no longer available for the program in 2024. I'll pause, Mayor Hare.
Oh, this is so good.
Also them.
you're doing such a good job. I don't know when to, it's hard sometimes for me to wait all the way to the end when you're giving such good data. So thanks for giving me a little grace here. I had a couple of questions. Are you able to provide perhaps back channel or at another discussion, the data by city as opposed to by counties? Do you have that data where you could see, for example, the transition from to permanent housing, that the individuals, whether they're in Seattle or in Federal Way or Auburn? Do you have that data?
In some ways, yes. And I'll work with my team to get some answers on that, including why it's in some ways yes and a little bit more complicated. But at a high level, we're able to talk about for services that are based at a physical location, like emergency shelters at a physical location. We can say where they are, where that program is, and how people are moving through that. So in programs like that, we can talk about performance of a shelter in Seattle, performance of a shelter in Bellevue, for instance. For other types of, some of our other programs like rapid rehousing, that's not a site-based service. And so people may move to locations that are, are not fixed to specific cities when they're looking for housing necessarily. But I will work with my team in order to get a little bit more information for you on that type of breakdown.
Yeah, it's always helpful for me to see where the activity is occurring. To look at it globally. We are countywide certainly, but it's still interesting to know where some of our bigger challenges are. The other thing is, it's hard for me always to try to determine if we have certain goals on these percentages. They look very favorable. It looks as though we're the right trajectory, but I can't tell whether the data is good or bad. When I toured the facility one day and you presented some data, I asked a few employees, because this is your subject matter, this is your core competency. I said, are these good numbers or bad numbers? And then they sort of asked me, well, what do you think? I said, well, I'm asking you, looking at best practices, looking at the seriousness of the issue of homelessness. Are we happy with these numbers, or are we lower than where we should be looking at best practices in this country? I'm not asking you directly. I don't want to put you on the spot on that. I don't want that to be unfair to you, but that's helpful for policymakers to know how we're trending relative to best practices.
Absolutely. And I'll speak briefly on that question, but not fully wrap it up today. A key thing for us that we're looking at, which is why we're looking at 23 to 2024, is looking to see, are we improving over time? There are some best practice metrics that we look at. For rapid rehousing, for instance, the target is to actually have 80% exit rate to permanent housing in programs. So we see we're coming just under that number here, but we are seeing that we're making progressive improvement towards that goal. And while some of those best practice numbers are sometimes a little lofty, we need to be able to look locally to see how does that apply within our local context, especially given that all of our outcomes when it comes to housing are dependent on things that the KCRHA does not fully control, such as housing availability, housing affordability. And so when we're looking at some of the system planning work coming up, we actually need to dig into this conversation with you all and be able to look at, okay, these are what we're seeing for best practice. This is what we're seeing as trends over time locally. What do we need to be shooting for as we look at improvements within the system? Largely, I would recommend in that time that we look at how are we making incremental improvements towards a better outcome, rather than just, is this a good number or a bad number? And we will work with you all in order to have a more informed conversation about that.
Lamont, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Owen, too, for all your work. And just kind of following up with along the data of what Bruce was mentioning, equity is so important, and not just racial equity, but geographical equity. Those experiencing disabilities, we know because of the housing crisis, a lot of people are being pushed into the southern part of King County, all of those things. And I know we had asked several times in the past that when there's a data presentation such as this, how are we understanding who is being served, the demographics, both regionally in the different parts of our region, but also racial and gender and other disability, dynamics, to really keep that eye towards equity. And so when we look at who's getting rapid rehousing, who's getting permanent supportive housing, who's getting these different housing interventions, we must have that eye on equity, right? Because we know for many years, the previous assessment tool that was being utilized nationwide was not assessing the vulnerability of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks, and hence they were not getting into permanent supportive housing. And so, so that's my first question is how can we begin to have some disaggregated data that's very critical in understanding who is being served, who's not being served, what's working well, what's not working well. The second piece is what are the returns to homelessness in these different areas? We need to understand that as well, because that also helps us to understand how successful we are and how we need to modify our interventions to reduce the returns to homelessness so people actually stay in the housing. So I would really like to understand and have data on returns to homelessness. And then thirdly, if you could share about how are we currently doing coordinated entry? We know coordinated entry is a HUD requirement, right? And there's a whole assessment and prioritization process so we can ensure that the most vulnerable is getting the resources, that those who are unsheltered is getting the resources. And I know during COVID and some other things, we had to do what's called backfilling, right? And we have amazing providers. I'm not saying that our providers would cream, but sometimes there are perverse incentives, right? And so it sometimes could be easier to help a family who may be less vulnerable, and I wish everyone could be helped, right? But that coordinated entry ensures that we are, prioritizing the most vulnerable and prioritizing those that are on the streets. So just in summary, um, what would it take for us to begin to see disaggregated data so that we could ensure the equity lens? Number two, how could we begin to see returns to homelessness data to understand how well we're keeping people housed? And number three, if you could briefly explain how is the coordinated entry assessment and prioritization process happening currently?
Thank you, Member Green, for those questions. Those are absolutely important things for us to be able to dig into, and unfortunately not what I am prepared to talk about today. I think we will follow up with some of those pieces for requests for other items to look at, particularly those ideas of the disaggregation of data and the different metrics that we look at for success. Today really focused in on just one particular metric at the moment, though.
Thank you for that, Owen, but I just want to reiterate that we've been asking for this for some time. I know since I've been on the governance board, I've been asking for that for some time. Is there something that I can do to support you all in that? Or like what can we do now to ensure we get this data? Because it's been over a year now. So what would it take? Because this is very important for the governance board to really understand and provide that kind of accountability. So how could we begin to get that data? What is needed to make that happen?
Absolutely get the desire to have that and the importance of it. Given the importance of that and making sure that we have a clear strategy behind it and can meet that need, we are going to have to take that question offline and dig into it internally. Councilmember Moore.
Hey, I'm wondering if this is data that we could have at the retreat in April.
Yes.
Or at least
I think
begin some of it.
Thank you. I do think that's an excellent place to bring that, particularly as we look at more that system effectiveness to make sure that equitable access to the system is something that we're achieving and able to look across many different parts of how they're working together.
Great, thank you.
And then lastly, Owen, are you able to
on.
briefly talk? Oh, sorry, I'll put my hand back up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. My apologies.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Owen, are you at least able to briefly talk about how the coordinated entry system is currently happening, the assessment and prioritization?
No, I'm not. I'm really specifically here to talk about the program performance of these contract areas from the RHA and don't have items prepped in order to talk about coordinated entry at this time.
Is coordinated entry happening at all? Is coordinated entry, that function, assessment and prioritization, is that happening at all?
Coordinated entry is happening, and it's the pathway into housing for things like rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. I do not have information today in front of me in terms of how that is performing or the current strategy, the current process behind it. That is not something that lives under my purview in this agency.
Let's
And
let
Owen, if I can jump in, we have a briefing on coordinated entry that we would love to provide to you, Dr. Green, and we'll follow up after to set that up.
all right, let's let Owen finish this presentation.
Thank you all. Councilmember Moore, did you have another question?
Just to ask to be, to have that COC briefing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Okay, moving on. Again, we saw that increase of 7% year over year. And part of this, we believe, is the increased length of time that clients are eligible for short-term subsidies and case management, effectively providing slightly longer-term support is yielding higher likelihoods of exiting to permanent housing. Now, for the final program area today of permanent supportive housing combines permanent housing with supportive services. The permanent housing usually includes some long-term leases or rental assistance. In 2024, KCRHA funded contracts that included 2,142 units at $9.1 million. In total, 2,231 folks were served through Q3 of each of that year. 2,180 of those folks either stayed in that program or exited. 2,152 of those either stayed in their program or exited to permanent housing, leading to a 99% success rate of those who maintained or exited to permanent housing. We're seeing similar rates of client maintaining their enrollment or exiting to permanent housing year over year for these programs. Permanent supportive housing, just to remind folks, is meant to be permanent. So largely people move into the program and stay in that program for intentionally for the duration of their life. One of the things I want to call out here, and thank you for those who have sent some questions ahead of time on this, is you're seeing a pretty big jump in 2023 to 2024 spending on this of a little over $4 million, but aren't seeing necessarily a commensurate increase in the number of folks served or units. This comes down to how we fund permanent supportive housing. We split out the costs between capital and development of permanent supportive housing and from services and operations of permanent supportive housing. The real big ticket item is the capital development and standing a lot of these programs up. The RHA, this does not hold that part of most of our PSH work, actually of all of our PSH work. Those are things that maintain at the city and the county. We largely are focused on the administration of contracts for services and operations, and that's what you're seeing in 2023 primarily. In 2024, however, a program that I know you all have heard of, the States Right-of-Way Program, or more recently called the Encampment Resolution Program, allowed KCRHA to dip in a little more on program stand-up by doing master leasing for buildings where we administer permanent supportive housing. That master leasing, stand-up of operations, and new programs is this costly gap that you're seeing of about $4 million. So standing up 3 new permanent supportive housing projects in 2024 had quite a big increase for that because we are spending a significant amount of money on the master leasing of things as well as the operation and services of it. So I just wanted to call that out specifically given that gap there and answer folks' questions about that. Sweet. Okay, next steps on this. The goal here is to make this a quarterly presentation. So we are working on getting into the regular cadence of that, which I believe means that you all will see the next version of this in March, which is next month. Turns out we're almost in March of 2025. That will include the full year of 2024 compared to 2023. And as we look towards the future, we'll be working with you to look deeper into program performance and system performance across the region. As has been talked about a little bit today, and as folks have requested that those system planning components where we're digging more into data and performance and having some of those conversations of like, what does a successful system really look like, are key focus areas for the 2025 board retreat. Right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Owen. Any other questions for him? All right, we are going to move on. Next, I'd like to welcome Jeff Sims, who is KCRHA Senior Director of Policy, who will also bring us a resolution. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am just making sure that, sorry, I'm not able to see my top here. Let me move this around. Just getting the PowerPoint online so you can all see that. Mr. Chair, could you confirm that the slideshow is showing?
Yep, I can see it. Great,
thank you. So hopefully I can end on a positive note with good news for everyone, and maybe even a little bit early. I'm here to talk to you about the authorization for a lease for Chief Seattle Club's Eagle Village. So a little bit of background on that village. You also have all this in your packet that was provided in advance. This is a village of micro-modular structures. We usually call them tiny homes. It's operated by Chief Seattle Club, which obviously also specializes in serving individuals of Native descent. It's an enhanced shelter program. The initial location operated from 2019 until last May on King County Metro property. It was known that they weren't going to have access to that property forever. That's the case with many of our tiny home villages. So they underwent a 7-month process to locate a new property, looking at properties around the region, a variety of factors that go into that. They settled on a location that was put forward by Sound Transit. It wasn't perfectly ideal. It did require some utility hookups being installed, things like that. However, it was the best option available. Most importantly, and this will be the number one thing throughout my talk here, is it's free and it's on public property. It would allow for 23 non-congregate units to be stood up in this village, which is similar in size to the prior village. The operations, assuming that you all authorize further operation of this lease, would actually be able to begin. They are currently on track to start on March 1st, assuming that we don't have any hiccups with anything arise. And assuming we receive the board's authorization for the full duration of this lease, I'll get to that in just a moment, that means we'd have access to this property through December of 2027. This is just some helpful visuals. You can see where we're talking about. It's at, I think it's technically, I'm not sure if it's technically South Beacon Hill, but you can see on the map here where we're talking about, and also you can see the site plan and location for the village. Let me go through the lease terms for what you are asked to authorize us to move forward with. KCRHA, first of all, would be the leaseholder. That's the approach that Sound Transit has taken anytime it's provided property for the use as homeless services. For example, previously Rosie's Village up in the U District, Sound Transit had the property. They leased it to the City of Seattle's Human Services Department, which then further passed on operation and control of that site to the Low Income Housing Institute. So in this case, we do the same thing. KCRHA would be the leaseholder. We would pass control of that site and the responsibilities called for in the lease to Chief Seattle Club. That's through our regular contract with them. We've made sure that those provisions are incorporated. Again, it is a free lease. There's no charge to us for use of this site. And then there's 3 terms, which I want to go into a little bit to make sure it's clear what we're talking about. The main background to understand here is that as we went through the negotiation of this site, the implementation board was disbanded before we could take this lease to them for final approval. And so we had to kind of rejigger our approach a little bit to make sure that we didn't impact site stand-up. And that meant some costs could potentially be incurred before we had your authorization to proceed. We talked to Chief Seattle Club about that. They understood the risks of commencing some of their site improvements to be able to put those micro modular units on site, and that you all might say no to this site, but they felt comfortable with those risks and have been proceeding with their site stand-up, knowing that we need authorization to continue having access to the site after April 2025. Sound Transit is also aware of that. Assuming that you all pass this resolution, which again is for free use of public property, we actually would essentially have access all the way through December of 2027. You can see at the end there is a last 1 year, it's called an extension and how we put the lease together. But really that is just Sound Transit's way of incorporating that we need to provide to them a year in advance. Actually, it's a little bit more than that. a plan for how we will move any individuals that are in that shelter onto other locations, and also how we'll make sure that all of the structures that are on site, so the tiny homes, the hygiene trailer, that all of that will be moved off as well. They want to make sure we have our concrete plan, our dates. That's actually a good time for us because Chief Seattle Club has also been undertaking the stand-up of permanent housing locations that they can map people to, things like that. But there is not a lot of discretion there as long as we meet our obligations. We have access through December 2027. The other key thing that I know would be of concern to all of the members here is community engagement, which went very well on this site. So there was initial outreach to key stakeholders in the area. You can see those listed here. The neighborhood was flyered in mid-October before commencing. There was email and phone outreach as well, and then there's been offers for further meetings. At this point, I want to share that there's not been any major concerns expressed by the surrounding community, and also that Sound Transit reviewed this community engagement plan before it was implemented and approved it, and then also the ultimate results, which were all favorable. So we have a free location that the community has been engaged about. There has not been any significant concerns that have been raised. And for that reason, we're bringing to you some action today. We'd like you to adopt your resolution 2025-01. That authorizes KCRHA to enter into a lease that extends for more than 12 months. That, as you can see, is we have to receive your authorization. Even if it's a free lease, we have to have your authorization for that. So that's what we're bringing to you here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the board? Mayor Harrell.
Thank you, Jeff. I will be supporting this. It looks like a win-win for everyone, which is always what we look for. My question, though, is, did you consider, this is paid for primarily by the county or exclusively by the county? Did you consider locations outside of the city of Seattle, it being funded by the county, or was this just so good that this is where we sort of focused? Sort of walk me through how we ended up there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. Chief Seattle Club did undertake a 7-month process for searching for locations. That included considering both inside the city of Seattle, the prior location was in Seattle, but also outside of the city of Seattle. There's a lot of considerations that go into what a site is. You can't have too steep a grade on site. Are there utility hookups? Often with public property, obviously the preference is to not have to pay for the use of a site. There's many parcels that are like that are not large enough to host a tiny home village of adequate size. Then there's also in some jurisdictions zoning and siting considerations that have to be considered. But through their 7-month process, Chief Seattle Club did look at properties both inside and outside initially. And this was just clearly, even though not perfect, it was clearly the best option, primarily because of the cost and the dynamics of the site.
Yeah. If I could, Chair, just to follow up on my own question.
Fine.
Jeff, I appreciate that. Like I said, I'll be supporting this. And I guess that, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. And, I recently was given a statistic that like 85% of all the tiny homes that are out there are in the city of Seattle. And I'm asking at some point, Seattle's only so big. Do you think that we need to start strategically looking outside the city as we look at this as an alternative to get people off the streets and in some tiny homes?
Well, I know that we always are looking across all of the county at the best opportunities that are available for us. And certainly some of the work that actually you did while part of the city council expedited and made it easier to site some of those tiny home villages with the ordinance that you passed that really lay out the process for siting and the considerations that have to go into it. So that's been very useful in the city of Seattle. But we continue to be wanting to work with all of the other jurisdictions that are, might be represented here on this call or not, to look into those other locations.
Sure.
There are some villages that have been locating outside of the city of Seattle.
Well, let me just be blunt, if I may. Yes, we looked at what a good site would look like, access to services, access to transit, et cetera. And perhaps I think what I may ask my staff to do is look at what a good policy for siting might be countywide to see if there's an appetite for us as a region to adopt site selection for tiny homes. What goes into that? And I think Seattle has provided a good model, a good base to start with. If we're going to act regionally, let's act regionally. So let's have some discussions after this about what a regional wide siting policy could look like as we look at our site selections. And I'll ask staff to do some work on that.
Absolutely. And obviously, and we definitely are here ready to collaborate with all the people here on our board representing that. Dr. Kinston, do you want to add anything to that?
Agree, Jeff. Just would love to do that. Have had conversations with folks outside of Seattle about, what can we do? What one more thing can we do across the region in your neighborhood, and having some really fruitful discussions there. So appreciate the continued support about the regional approach.
Sarah, go ahead.
Thanks. Just piggybacking on this, the KCRHA's policies on master leasing would also be helpful for me as well. So in the spirit of regional approach, maybe this is something that we can talk about at the retreat as well. Thank you.
Lamont, go ahead.
I'm really excited about this resolution. Chief Seattle Club is such an amazing organization and provider in the service that they provide. So I move that we adopt resolution 2025-01.
Is there a second?
Second. Chair.
Yes.
No, I'm just saying, Roosevelt McWhorter,
Okay.
second.
Yeah. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Sorry, I'm sorry. Affiong, please take a roll call vote.
Certainly, Chair. Member Constantine? Member Barone?
Aye.
Member Balducci?
Aye.
Member McWhorter Jr.?
Aye.
Member Burney? Member Prince? Chair Prince?
Aye.
Member Backus?
Aye.
Member Moore?
Aye.
Member Harrell?
Aye.
Member Nelson?
Aye.
Member Green?
Aye.
Chair, the motion has passed with 9 votes.
All right, motion carries. And now with that, it brings us to the end of today's meeting. Is there a motion? And hold on, let me get through this. Is there a motion and a second to adjourn?
And yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make a real brief comment. It is Black History Month. If I may make a under 1 minute comment, is that
as long as it's under 1 minute, that's fine.
Yes. Okay. So as we come to the close of this governance board meeting during Black History Month, I just really want to center that homelessness is not just about housing, it's about justice. In King County, Black people represent less than 7% of the population, but over 30% of those experiencing homelessness, and that is an undercount. These numbers are not accidental. They are the result of deliberate policies that have stripped Black communities of wealth, opportunity, and stability for generations. We cannot allow these injustices to persist. We must be relentless in our commitment to change, dismantling the systems that keep Black people disproportionately unhoused, investing in Black-led solutions, and ensuring that racial justice is not just a conversation, but a practice. Black history is a story of struggle, resilience, and triumph against impossible odds. And this fight for housing justice is a part of that story. And it is our responsibility to ensure that future generations look back and see this moment as one where we choose courage over complacency, action over indifference, and as Dr. Martin Luther King would say, community over chaos.
Thank you, Lamont. Thank you so much for centering us with that. I will also say that was over 1 minute, but I'm not going to hold you to it because it was very important. Bruce.
This is be over under 30 seconds. I just want to say you chaired a great meeting, and this is one of the best presentations I've seen from RHA. It was a great meeting, great data, great discussion. I think our new model is working, so I just want to thank RHA staff for a marvelous production. And I still got time, but I'll yield it.
Kathy, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to echo those comments. It was a really productive, helpful meeting. And looking forward to additional discussion, particularly at the retreat. And to the point so eloquently made by Lamont, also it's important. Economic empowerment is a huge piece to the homelessness housing issue as well. And so to the extent that we can, as a body and a region, improve on economic empowerment, I really look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, this is Backus. I move to approve or move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second, Balducci.
All right, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We will see you on March 20th. Same bat time, same bat channel, 10 to 12. Meeting is adjourned.
Bye, everybody.